So they've chosen to put a man who is as black as the ace of spades at the front of the Anglo-Saxon shield wall, meaning he's either a housecarl, the elite warrior of Anglo-Saxon society, or he's a locally raised militia, a levy, from the feared. What a ridiculous casting decision. They are spitting in your face in terms of historical accuracy. Welcome back to History Revealed. Today I'm going to be reacting to the BBC's King and Conqueror series, the great clash between Harold Godwinson and William Duke of Normandy. Now, this covers one of the most important events in British history, the Norman Conquest and the Battle of Hastings. Now, this has been a very long series and I've had to cut down significantly, so I've split it up into a series of clips. I've timestamped everything, so if you want to focus on the battles more than the historical events, or the historical events more than the battles, feel free. And let's get to it. And so we begin. Okay, I like that. Straight into the battle scene, really giving an idea of the chaos and the carnage of the fight between the Normans and the Saxons at Hastings. Very good opening. Cavalry. Yeah, that's very good. Nice up close and personal stuff. It gives a really good perspective of the battle. Okay, we're calling out each other's names in the battle. Okay, historically this didn't happen. Obviously, Harold and William did not meet on the battlefield like this. And yes, in the chaos, the noise of a medieval battle, you weren't calling out your enemy by name so you could have a little standoff or a chat, whatever it may be. Okay, historical error there immediately. Within the first 2 minutes, they've managed to do that. Well, other than William and Harold talking to each other on the battlefield. So, England had not emerged from a civil war when the earldoms of Wessex, Mercia, and Northumbria agreed to crown a new king, which would be Edward the Confessor. This took place in 1043, and the previous decade there had been rivalries, but there had not been civil war. In fact, from the time of Canute the Great's invasion, he became king in 1016 and reigned until 1035. Obviously, there was fighting when he took over the country, but there was relative peace during his reign. And there certainly wasn't a sort of full-blown civil war after he died. Rivalries, yes, but not civil war. So, bad start. And now we are introduced to our first protagonist of what will be the Battle of Hastings, and that is Harold Godwinson. All right. Now, I'm not going to comment too much on this. I'm going to focus on the broader themes in my analysis of this series. But this kind of thing has got a lot of scrutiny, and I'm talking about the outfits that they've chosen for the actors. This man, Harold, is the son of one of the most powerful nobles in Anglo-Saxon England on his way to the coronation of the king. He looks particularly drab, distinctly unglamorous. Look at his cloak, look at his clothes. Now, people will be able to go into great detail about the particulars of Anglo-Saxon clothing at the time. So you see the two, we call them ropes, across his cloak. They'll be able to tell you if that was in keeping of the time. I'm not sure it is. His clothes look a little dirty if you see the white shirt beneath it, and he himself looks a little grubby. Is how I'd describe him. You would not think this is, the son of a great nobleman. So it's interesting that they've gone for this color palette and this style.
It's a fucking massacre.
He's found a sword.
Harold, what's going on? The sword! Tostig, take a look at this. What do you think? The metal.
The grind is pretty rough. It's not ours. Mercy.
Marcia.
Right. Okay, that didn't happen. There was no sign, whether it was in Old English or Norman or Norse, whatever, that said "Made in Mercia" on the swords. You would not be able to tell which earldom it had come from. Like Anglo-Saxon swords, well, swords of this period, I should say, were much more broader in sort of category. There was differences between a Danish sword, an Anglo-Saxon one, a Norman one. There was not one sword from Mercia, one sword from Northumbria, one from Wessex. It did not work like that. They would not be able to identify the origin of the earldom by looking at the sword.
Well, why would Mercia break the peace agreement? They'd forfeit everything to the crown.
Exactly. Which is why we have to tell Father.
No idea what he's talking about there. On a factual basis, there was no peace agreement to be broken because Wessex and Mercia were not fighting. There was no peace treaty that was broken between Mercia and anyone at this time. So I don't know what angle they're going with this one, but that's not in line with the historical record. Also, as a side note, and it's quite annoying when they do this, it's not a big deal, but if you notice when he pulled the sword out from under the wheel, it was blood-stained. And what he has just done is sheathed a blood-stained sword. Bear in mind, swords are very expensive at this time. Great status symbols in Anglo-Saxon England were swords, and he's just put a dirty sword back in its sheath. They could have done better with that. Okay, so we're at the events that they were all on their way to, which is the coronation of Edward the Confessor. Let's take a look. And there we get a look at William the Conqueror himself, or at this time, William, Duke of Normandy, played by Nikolai Coster-Waldau, or Valdo, I'm not sure how to pronounce that one. Let's just take a look how old he is. Let me just do a quick search. Okay, so the actor who plays William here, Nikolai Coster-Waldau, is 55. That's 40 years too old to play William, Duke of Normandy at this time, because this took place in 1043 and William was born in the year 1028. Not only that, William was not at the coronation of Edward the Confessor. He was, as I mentioned, 15 years old, and he was involved in a life or death struggle for the Duchy of Normandy. And it's interesting that they've decided to portray him as being at the coronation. Almost certainly sort of like a rivalry with Harold Godwinson. But that really wasn't the case at this point, because Harold Godwinson, he was about 20. He wasn't significant yet. His father, Godwin, was the top dog in the Godwin family. So he really wasn't an important player yet. But not only is this historically inaccurate, but I think they've missed a really big opportunity artistically to portray William's early life. And the reason being is that William's youth was the making of him. And it's an absolutely fascinating story. He's the bastard child of Robert, the Duke of Normandy. And he becomes the Duke at a very young age when his father dies. And when this happens, Normandy descends into almost total anarchy. And William is the ultimate survivor. He survives multiple assassination attempts. Many of his guardians are killed as rival Norman barons try and take the duchy from him. It's a perilous time. He has to go into hiding. He has to do all sorts to dodge attempts on his life, attempts on his guardians' lives, and it's in this sort of fire pit that he emerges as sort of the warrior and political survivor that he becomes. And all this takes place sort of whilst Edward the Confessor is getting crowned. Like I mentioned, he's only 15 years old, and he wins his first victory, his first sort of independent major victory at the Battle of Vallée d'Un, which is in 1047, where he defeats a man named Guy of Brienne, Guy of Burgundy is sometimes called. And he does this alongside King Henry of France, and that's an incredibly significant development because he really comes into his own then. And I think that backstory of this survivor duke is far more interesting than whatever they're setting up here. So historically inaccurate, and I think artistically poor as well. Like, poor choices all round. So another thing to mention, which is particular to this actor, he's obviously most well known for portraying Jaime Lannister in Game of Thrones. And they seem to have taken inspiration from the Battle of Winterfell, which any Game of Thrones fan will know was a very dark affair, as in literally dark. You couldn't see what was going on. And it's similar with this coronation. I'm going to have to up the brightness in my editing because the color palette, like I mentioned at the beginning, just seems to be drab and drab again. There's no color to actually what would have been a very colorful affair. And the lighting, that's the one thing I would have forgiven them on the historical accuracy. Obviously, old Anglo-Saxon buildings weren't as well lit as modern buildings, but if they made sure that their characters were well lit, I would have forgiven them on that one. There is Harold Godwinson, like I mentioned, setting up a rivalry. And as I also mentioned, he was a young man. Was he at the coronation? Probably not. Maybe. He's not mentioned as such, but who knows? His father was. Godwin, the Earl of Wessex, was. And I don't know. Again, I don't know why they're doing this. Like, he looks like he's just played rugby. Like, this seems to be a sort of standard look they've got for him. He would be in his most glamorous, sort of cleanest garb for the coronation of the king if he was there. And they've really not made much effort in this regard. And I imagine this will continue throughout this series. Oh, God. They're at it again. Well, it wasn't very long. Here we go. We have here the BBC's favourite tactic. We have what appears to be a black Anglo-Saxon noblewoman, because, bear in mind, only nobles really would have been here, or at least sort of like in the front row as is being portrayed. It's just, I know it's not a documentary, and people will say that, they've got that artistic license, but you really should make an effort because so many people gain their historical knowledge from sort of historical fiction like this. And especially younger people will look at this and think, oh, that was normal. It was normal that there was black people at the coronation of an Anglo-Saxon king. For God's sake, there wasn't. And yeah, I mean, to me, it's just the same as like if they're having a feast, like they're using chopsticks, which obviously they didn't use. You can say, oh, well, it's artistic license, but it's pretty pathetic if you ask me. You should try and match physical descriptions to characters. Which is why it's not quite as severe. But I criticised using an older William, Duke of Normandy, when he was 15. You're using an older man. Like, you could have used a younger man and then introduced the famous actor later. But yeah. This is all very poor on the BBC's part.
Forbid robbery and all unrighteous deeds, promising to enjoin justice and mercy in all cases brought before you.
I swear to it.
Nice bit of foreshadowing there of the rivalry between William and Harold. Totally historically inaccurate, as we've discussed, but fun anyway. I just want to wind back a little, just show you something. Okay, so Edward the Confessor has just been crowned. Now, the crown he uses was to be the crown for the next 500 years. And it wasn't until the Civil War when Charles I was executed, that the crown was either melted or sold off. And so this was the crown jewels that were used by him would go down the ages. Now, the thing to remember about Edward the Confessor is he was canonized, so he became Saint Edward. And when the monarchy was restored, the new crown became the Saint Edward's crown. And that crown was very heavy, so lots of people didn't use it. However, it came back into fashion. I believe it was King George V who was the first king to use it after a long period of time. And our most recent coronation, which was the coronation, of course, of King Charles III in 2023, he had the St. Edward's crown on his head, and it was all named after this man, Edward the Confessor. Okay, now we've arrived at one of the most important yet most disputed episodes in the build-up to the Norman conquest. And this is in 1064 when Harold Godwinson is in Normandy and he swears an oath to William, Duke of Normandy. Now, everything about this has been hotly debated and is still debated to this day. What did Harold say? What didn't he say? Was he forced? Was he not? And this episode became a key piece of propaganda for William to justify his invasion, especially to get papal support, which was a key factor for him. Now let's see how the BBC have decided to portray this one.
With a Harold Godwinson at your side, you cannot lose. Give me your hand. You saved my life. I saved yours. We're bound together forever. Normandy and Wessex together.
Okay, now this feature's very interesting, and I'm very pleased with the way the BBC have done this, because this is what would have happened. This is how the oath would have taken place. You swear over the bones of saints, because to make an oath in these times, it was a vow before God as much as anything else. So to do it over holy relics like this is very much accurate, and it probably would have been done by a bishop. This is Bishop Odo, who is a key character in the Bayeux tapestry. He was Odo of Bayeux, and he is likely the man who commissioned the tapestry, which of course isn't a tapestry, but that's a separate story. So very important man who's doing this.
Today, on Whitsunday, God has blessed Normandy. Edward, King of England, has chosen William our Duke to be his successor to the throne of England. And now, with God as his witness, and over the holy relics of Bayeux, Harold of Wessex will swear his loyalty to William of Normandy as the next King of England.
And as all of Europe knows, Godwin never breaks his word.
That is true. I, Harold Godwinson, Earl of Wessex, swear my absolute loyalty to the rightful heir of England. I give you my word on it.
Very dramatic, very dramatic. And I actually like what they've done there. I like what they've done. Because we don't really know what happened, and everyone has a different version of events. So for William, this was Harold swearing his loyalty to him, plain and simple, and he reneged on his word. Now for Harold, there's various versions of sort of his side of the story. One is this didn't happen. Other people, that's an outside opinion. Other people say that the reason he was in Normandy, even disputed why he was there. Why was he in Normandy? So some people say he was shipwrecked. Others say he was there to negotiate the release of hostages. And the main argument was he was effectively coerced into doing this. There was no way of him sort of expecting to go back to England without doing what William said. Now, William Is he a guest? Is he a prisoner? He has control of him, and so it's very much something done against his will. And the arguments go back and forth as to what was said and who said it with this whole thing. This episode becomes the centerpiece of Norman propaganda as justification for the invasion, and it is depicted like explicitly on the Bayeux Tapestry. You can see the image of it. I'll pull it up and put it on the screen for you all to see. It's that important to them as a justification for the invasion. And the other thing to remember is the importance of oaths at this time. To take an oath, it was a political, a social, and a religious commitment. So if you broke one, it wasn't like now where it would just be breaking a promise. You were sinning against God by doing this, because you are making a binding promise before God by swearing over the bones of saints, by doing it over holy relics. It was so important. And for a man who was going to be king to be seen to be breaking an oath, a holy vow before God, disqualifies him as being king. And that's why William was so keen to portray Harold as an oath breaker. An oath was the foundation of the political order at this time. It was how lordship was sworn. It was sort of the basis of loyalty to your superiors in medieval society at this time. So it could not have been more crucial to William's claim to the throne and his position as Duke of Normandy and eventually as King of England. And if you think about it, William wants to be king. And when Harold eventually becomes king, he's got a problem because this man has taken his title. So if he wants to go to the Pope or to others to get support, but let's take the Pope as a perfect example, he can't just say to him, well, I fancy a good old land grab with all my knights. Do you fancy supporting it? He can't say that. He has to portray it as a sort of more righteous, sort of godly venture that he's going on. So this is the perfect way for him to do so. This man has broken the oath that he made before God, and I would like your support as, God's representative on earth. And it worked. William received the papal banner, and he flew that banner at Hastings. And in terms of legitimacy and ability to attract followers to his cause, that was very important. By the way, whilst I am generally very impressed with this scene, it's not all perfect. Let's just go back and have a quick look at something. So it's about here. There you go. Here with Bishop Odo. Now, the bishop's hat is known as a mitre. Like, I can't go into great sort of length as to sort of which particular elements of the bishop's costume are correct and which one's not. But that mitre looks absolutely ridiculous. It looks like he's got a birdcage on his head. They certainly wouldn't have been wearing this sort of thing at that time, but whatever. On the whole, it's a very good scene, and I'm impressed. So, we have moved forward to 1066. As you can see by the crown on his head, Harold Godwinson is now king, and the Vikings have just invaded England.
Is that Morcar?
Okay. If you can spot one already, you can probably see where this is going. I'll give you a hint with the mouse. So, this man on the right, is a fictional character. He's not even playing a real life person. Obviously, they've chosen a black actor to do this. And not the first one we've picked up upon, of course. God. And he's portraying the right-hand man, although he's actually standing on Harold's left. He's portraying the right-hand man of the Earl of Wessex and now the King of England. It's just, it's embarrassing. It really is. Just, they're so desperate to shoehorn this stuff in. And he's a made-up character, so they're not trying to line it up with any historical record, which they're allowed to do. It's historical drama, but what do you think was happening when he was walking through the streets of London or Winchester, throughout the episodes? Were people not turning their heads and looking like, wow, that's unusual? We don't see many people looking like that in Anglo-Saxon England, in Wessex or in Mercia. What a surprise! It's just it's no effort.
Here he is.
King Harold, out for a ride with his men while his country burns. Where have you seen battle?
York. And you promised me Northumbria.
All right. Now, this guy is real. Well, this is Morcar, the Earl of Northumbria, who in the story has just got back from losing the Battle of Fulford. So the Battle of Fulford was the Viking victory against the Anglo-Saxons near York, and Morcar fought that battle against Harold Hardrada and Tostig Godwinson, and he lost. This is the worst one, if you ask me, the race swapping characters, because Morcar was a real person. He was the Earl of Northumbria, so one of the most powerful nobles in Anglo-Saxon England, and this is what they're doing. This one, like I say, I really think this is worse when you have an expectation of what an Anglo-Saxon noble looks like. When you have a real person, I don't believe we have any physical descriptions of Morcar, but we can reasonably guess. We can reasonably guess he didn't look like this. Like I mentioned earlier, a lot of people will form their view of history from historical fiction like this. So young people might come away thinking that this is what the Earl of Northumbria looked like. Not what some noblewoman in the background looked like or some extra looked like, but a real person. Some people, that doesn't bother them. They've got a very warped view of history and how history should be viewed by the public. So this sort of thing is perfectly fine to them. But I believe you should try and get as close as possible. Now, that doesn't mean that you pick actors who have rotten teeth, and it doesn't mean that you pick actors who, let's say, they're 5 foot tall because that was the average height of the time. Like, reasonable adjustments can be made, but when you sort of stick your fingers in the eye of the viewer like this, it's particularly galling.
I didn't realize I'd have to fight to the death for it.
You've seen Hardrada's forces. How many of them?
Impossible to tell.
Why? Because you rode south too fast to see them?
No, because they're everywhere. They're putting out their fires with blood.
Any mercenaries with them? Any cavalry? What are Hardrada's forces? Is there anyone with him? Does he have any allies?
You haven't heard, have you?
Heard what?
Hardrada's riding with an advisor. A local expert.
Who?
Your brother Tostig.
That can't be true.
I saw...
Okay. Historical reality, much different again. So, Tostig Godwinson did betray his brother by fighting alongside Harold Hardrada. However, this was not a surprise to Harold. Tostig had already raided the south coast of England before he joined forces with Hardrada. So, and the dispute between the two of them was a long time in the making. Tostig had been Earl of Northumbria, however, he'd been a terrible Earl of Northumbria, and he'd have to have been removed, and then he ended up in exile. This was no secret to Harold. He was very much involved in it, so there was no surprise whatsoever when he turned up alongside Harold Hardrada and fought his forces.
him with my own eyes.
Is he a hostage? Are the Vikings trying to lever advantage?
He didn't look like a hostage to me. He was riding right beside King Hardrada himself.
Well, then you weren't close enough to tell, were you? Because if you were close enough to see Hardrada, you would be dead by now. Tostig must be a hostage. That is the only explanation.
Okay, this just portrays Harold as an idiot. Tostig was one of the main commanders at the Battle of Fulford because he commanded his own forces alongside Harold Hardrada. So, yeah, just why they're choosing to portray Harold Godwinson in this way. This is the guy who played the Game of Thrones of Anglo-Saxon England and of Northern Europe at that time. Like, he understood betrayals. He understood that his brother had joined the enemies of his family by going to William first. He obviously, like I mentioned, raided the south coast, and then he went to Harold Hardrada. This was a man who'd been dispossessed of his earldom, and he wanted it back. And Harold Godwinson was no fool in regard to that. Okay, we've arrived at the part I'm most excited for, which is the battles. So this is the Battle of Stamford Bridge, where the Anglo-Saxons take on the Vikings. Let's see how this battle scene plays out. They're doing a Battle of Winterfell thing again, where everything's so dark you can barely see it. That doesn't look like a very big army. The reality is that Harold Godwinson marched many thousands north for this battle. Okay. So they didn't really pay much attention to the historical accuracy of the costumes, of the appearance of the characters, and now, to my great disappointment, they haven't paid any historical accuracy to the battles. The whole setting for this is wrong. So the Battle of Stamford Bridge took place on a very bright, sunny, hot day. And that was a key part of the battle because the Vikings on the west bank of the River Derwent were sunbathing, effectively. They didn't have their armor on, and Harold Godwinson had marched the army to the north so fast, they were caught completely off guard. It wasn't quite a stealth attack, as it's sort of portrayed here. It was more of a surprise attack. So they saw them coming. It's just they weren't ready for them. They didn't sneak in sort of. I assume this is sort of either very early in the morning or it looks like a sort of the sun's dawn, like the sun is just rising, and the sort of the mist is still there. So that's completely inaccurate. It wasn't an attack on the Viking camp either. We'll see how the battle progresses, but of course the Battle of Stamford Bridge had a bridge. That's where the bulk of the fighting. Well, not the bulk of the fighting, but that's where much of the fighting took place, because you had the fighting on the west bank. Those Viking forces were defeated, and then the Saxon army crossed onto the east bank, where the main Viking force had formed a shield wall and fought. So let's see how this progresses. I'm still waiting for this bridge, by the way. Hasn't turned up. And one of the great legends of the battle took place on the bridge because the Vikings had been pushed back across. However, one giant Viking axeman managed to hold back at one point the entire Saxon army. And it said that he took out 40 Saxons with his battle axe. And this gave the Vikings behind him valuable time to get ready, get their armor, and get into formation. And he was only defeated, this giant Norseman, when an Anglo-Saxon got into the river by using a barrel to float underneath the bridge and then stab him with a spear that he drove up underneath the bridge into his under regions, shall we say, where he wasn't so well armored. And that's one of the most famous stories of this battle. Doesn't look like they've decided to portray it. Spotted his brother.
Harold, come to hand over your crown.
Okay, there we go. This is supposed to be Harold Hardrada. I love how they've gone for sort of the classic Viking brute. Harold Hardrada was considered, well, a very good-looking man. He was one of the greatest warriors and most famous warriors in Europe. He'd fought in the Varangian Guard, which was the personal guard of the Roman Emperor, of the Eastern Roman Emperor. And he'd fought in the Middle East, he'd fought in what is now Ukraine, and of course he'd fought his fellow Norsemen back in Norway. Really the most celebrated soldier in Europe. And of all the three contenders who who fought in England in 1066, Harold Godwinson, William of Normandy, and him, he was probably the greatest warrior of the three. And yeah, just a scruffy beard, I don't know what this armor is. He should be wearing mail armor. It doesn't. It looks like we'll maybe get a better glimpse in a minute, but sort of looks like sort of leather of some sort. By the way, just looking at Harold's armor, yes, it's got a bit of mail, but the way the design of it is terrible. I know that the weapons and armor expert is going to have an absolute field day with this one. But another very disappointing representation here of a character, of a real life person. And the most defining feature of Harold Hardrada is he was said to be a giant man. Different accounts, some say about 2 meters tall, others say about 7 foot tall, at a time where the average height was much shorter than that. So he was really a giant. Okay, I'll just clear it up now. Harold Hardrada was not killed in a personal duel with Harold Godwinson. It makes nice television, but it didn't happen. Oh dear. And Tostig certainly didn't come to his rescue, and Harold didn't accidentally kill his brother. They've really gone for the sort of melodramatic side of this. Sort of brothers fighting in battle against each other and accidentally kills him. Right, so having won the Battle of Stamford Bridge, Harold Godwinson is now, let's say, burying his brother's body. Although, as we'll see in a moment, he's not really burying him. Let's take a look. This really couldn't get any worse. It really couldn't. Harold Godwinson's brother Tostig was not burnt on a funeral pyre. Let me make that clear. He was not. This was a pagan practice that had largely gone in the very much Christian Anglo-Saxon England at this time. Harold Godwinson never would have done this. Never. It's sort of Victorian romanticization idea that the BBC have ran with. So they're not paying attention to any historical accuracy from any point of view, including the very important sort of religious symbolism point of view, which was, as we mentioned with the, although they did portray the oath quite well, but not this. So they did it for one thing and not the other. So absolutely sacrilegious at the time. And definitely did not happen. It's said that he was buried in York, by the way, which is nowhere near the coast, and this is clearly in front of the coastline. So, yeah, another way they've got it wrong. Right, so the Battle of Stamford Bridge has been won, and the Norman invasion is on the way. I'll also point out that in real life, Harold Hardrada was killed by an arrow wound to the neck, not in a duel with another king.
Normandy! He's on his way! I know it! Come on! My lord, wait!
This is very good. That shot there I really like. Let's just go back a little. And you'll see just getting a sense of the scale of the invasion. There you go. Is so important because this truly was an epic struggle, and it was an epic venture that William was undertaking. He gathered people from all over France. It wasn't just the Normans. It was there were Bretons, there were Flemish mercenaries, there were all sorts there. And yeah, interesting how they got the size of the army wrong. Harold Godwinson's army, but the fleet looks a reasonable size. This looks impressive. So, a good sense of scale here. And now the moment we've been waiting for, the Battle of Hastings itself. Now, this battle is not only one of the most well-known in British history in terms of the name, it's also one of the most well-known in terms of the story of the battle. And this sets it apart from other famous battles. The average person probably couldn't tell you the sequence of events at a battle like Agincourt or Waterloo, but Hastings is incredibly well-known in that regard. And so, despite the abysmal the abysmal record this program currently has, let's see if they have given this battle its due respect. I'm not holding out for anything, but let's see. Okay, this part is a bit of a mixed bag, because the Anglo-Saxon soldiers you can see at the top of the hill, that part is accurate. That was the position they took up. The Normans were at the bottom of the hill, so they had a literal uphill struggle in the battle. As you can see, the Anglo-Saxons are holding kite shields. These are sort of longer shields than the sort of standard round shields. And you can probably notice that there is a similar pattern on most of the shields. There was not a sort of standardization of shields at that time, so it would not have looked like that. Maybe as we get more close-ups, we'll be able to comment on the weapons a little more.
As soon as we make a move, there'll be a wall of Saxon shields on that hillside. We'll use infantry and archers, grind him till he breaks.
That part is... well, I don't know if he said it, but that's an interesting aspect of the Norman army. It was very much a combined arms approach. So they had the finest cavalry in Europe, they had archers, and they had infantry, whereas the Saxon army was almost entirely infantry, made up of the sort of the levies, which were known as the feared, and then you had the elite warriors, the housecarls. They were the ones with the great axes, heavier armor, designed to protect the Earl, and Harold had many of them at Hastings. Okay, I'm not liking what I'm seeing so far. You would have had the housecarls at the front. If you look at this armor, I'll just use the mouse. I want to see more axes and a bit more mail as well. Not impressed. Also, another prominent feature of the helmets was a nose covering, which I can't see at all on any of these. And there's one. I won't comment on the armor. I can't go into too much detail, or I'll just get sidetracked. And so the battle begins.
Shield wall!
Okay, this was the Saxon strategy. Form a shield wall and hold. It's a very static strategy, but effective in circumstances like this. And given they were at the top of the hill, it was very difficult for the Normans to break through. And Harold wanted to just hold his position and wear William down through attrition. This is an interesting shot because the Norman army on the right, which is at the base of the hill, looks quite a bit larger than the Saxon one on the left, even though in reality they were quite evenly matched in terms of numbers.
Archers!
No, no, no. Now, this might seem like a small detail, but it's a hugely important one. Let's just go back a moment. The arrows that are coming in are being fired into the air so they fall down on the Saxon soldiers. That did not happen. The important thing to remember when it comes to the archers is that they were mostly ineffective at the start of the battle because the archers were firing uphill into the Saxon shield wall at effectively a sort of straight angle. So what it meant was that the arrows were going into the shields, and if they didn't go into the shields, they were going over the heads of the Saxons. So this is highly inaccurate, and the trajectory of the arrows changed, and this was one of William's sort of great acts as a commander, is that he took the initiative, realized later in the battle that the arrows were ineffective at being shot at the trajectory that they were, and had them fire high into the sky, so they fell down upon the Saxon ranks. And that was a really important part of the battle, and it did not happen at the beginning. So this is highly inaccurate, and it might seem like a small detail, but it's a very significant detail. So the infantry advance.
Steady! Hold the line! Hold the line!
What? So they've chosen to put a man who is as black as the ace of spades at the front of the Anglo-Saxon shield wall, meaning he's either a housecarl, the elite warrior of Anglo-Saxon society, or he's a locally raised militia, a levy, from the feared. What a ridiculous casting decision. They are spitting in your face in terms of historical accuracy. I'm really at the end of my tether with this now. Like, they've just gone from one ridiculous decision to another ridiculous decision, and this really takes the biscuit. Ugh, good God. And please understand that whether it's me or others who get frustrated at things like this, it's not because we just don't want to see black people on the screen. No. If I saw a historical drama about the Battle of Rorke's Drift, and within the Zulu army there were white-skinned Slavic soldiers, I would find it equally ridiculous. My intelligence would be equally insulted, and I would be equally critical of the BBC for doing something like that. This is about respecting the historical record, respecting the audience, and having just some appreciation for history without doing these things just to, I don't know if they're doing it to spite people or it's some sort of political motive. Well, one way or the other, it's completely out of order, and it's pathetic on their part. Anyway, back to the battle.
Shields up! Shields up!
Okay, I like this sort of representation of sort of the melee of fighting, and sort of how close quarters the fighting was, and how sort of cramped and congested it was. It gives you some idea of how it was fought.
Hold the line!
Okay, so Morcar has arrived at the battle. Very dramatic. Let's see what goes on.
My lord, the men await your orders. Sire, if we do not help King Harold right now...
We wait.
My lord.
He said, we wait.
Okay. That is completely historically inaccurate. Completely. Morcar was not at Hastings. Now, it's debated why he wasn't. Was his army too exhausted from Fulford, or was he holding back for political reasons? But he was not there. He did not stand above the hill and watch on with his troops, contemplating whether to get involved in the battle. That did not happen. However, and I'll just wind it back to show you. So this shot here is very interesting because whilst this didn't happen at the Battle of Hastings, something similar to this did happen at another famous battle in British history, which is the Battle of Bosworth, where Lord Stanley was in Morcar's position whilst Henry VII and Richard III did battle, and he was the kingmaker. Whichever army he joined was going to win the battle, and that's what happened. He joined Henry VII in battle, and Richard III was slain on the field. So something like this has happened on English soil, but it most certainly did not happen at Hastings. I also find it quite interesting that it's one thing that they race swapped Morcar, but then having race swapped him and made him sort of an ethnic character, they then showed him as treacherous, as watching on as his king will eventually lose, which never even happened. So they cast a black guy to play Morcar and then made him out to be a traitor. So very poor BBC. Anyway, back to the battle.
You understand the plan? Keep your eyes on me, Odo. You'll know what to do.
Come on! Protect the Duke! We ride!
It's William.
Strike the Duke! Ready the spear!
Okay, so this is a very dramatic moment. William is going to enter the fray. Now, there is an important detail that they have got wrong here. William isn't wearing a helmet, and that is significant not only because it's what a general at the time would have worn if he was going into battle, but, well, I'll let it progress on a little further, but it's very significant as the story of Hastings that William was wearing a helmet. So let's see what happens.
Where is he?
So, yeah, that is accurate, and this is why it's important. Some of William's army did believe that he had been killed because he did come off his horse, and they thought that might have been it for him. Now, I will bring up the bio tapestry to show you what happens, because as you can see from this image, William is raising his helmet when he gets back on his horse to show his army that he is still alive and make sure they don't lose heart. Because if they know their duke is dead, their morale will shatter. So it was a very important piece of sort of psychological operations by William to raise that helmet and show that he's alive to maintain the morale of his army. And it's a small but very important detail which, again, they've got wrong. So this is also a very significant moment in the battle because the Anglo-Saxon shield wall loses its discipline, and seeing the Normans retreat, some of the Anglo-Saxons go after them. Now, in reality, this happened because of the retreat of the Bretons on the left, which William was actually able to exploit. So, that's why that happened. And it led to William using the tactic of feigned retreats to draw out the Anglo-Saxon shield wall and ultimately weaken it. Again, showing William's brilliant initiative and tactical skill as a commander.
Wait! Hold! No! The wall is breaking! Hold the wall! Hold the wall! Duke William's alive! The Duke's alive! The Duke lives! Attack!
There you go. William did get back on his horse to show his army he was alive. Now, something I'll notice, which is that William fought on horseback and Harold didn't. Now, whilst this gave Harold an advantage in terms of morale because he was fighting shoulder to shoulder with his men, it gave William the advantage of mobility. It was when the shield wall lost discipline that was the moment that sort of fighting on foot showed its disadvantages, because it was far more difficult for Harold to go to a section of the line and maintain discipline because he was right in the thick of it. But as I mentioned before, there's no helmet to be removed. Very important detail. But I suppose they're representing, William trying to show his army that he's still among them, which is something. Okay, so it's the moment that none of us have been waiting for. Harold has left the protection of the shield wall, and he's about to engage William, Duke of Normandy, in one-on-one combat.
That crown. Gonna have to give it up now. I can't.
What dreadful dialogue. That crown, you're going to have to give that up now. I can't. That's right up there with, from my point of view, the Jedi are evil. Maybe he'll start talking about sand next as well.
So be it.
So be it.
Did that crown just break? First of all, he wouldn't have been wearing the bloody crown on his helmet at all. But is it that flimsy that it breaks just from falling on the ground? I think he's been sold a knockoff crown. Perhaps that crown was made in China. Yes, because when my mortal enemy is on the ground, there for the taking, I do pause dramatically to make sure I take in the world before I end his life. Very good. Okay, I think we're going to leave it there. Yes, it is said that Harold did take an arrow to the eye, but it wasn't after William looked longingly into Bishop Odo's eyes, then picked up an arrow and rammed it in with his own hands. It is thought that it happened when, as I mentioned earlier, the Norman archers fired high to the sky, and then the arrows fell down on the Saxons, including onto Harold himself. And I'll bring it up again, the bio tapestry. There it is, with a picture of Harold with an arrow in his eye. Very famous image. It's somewhat disputed whether that actually happened or whether he was killed in combat. He certainly never left the shield wall. Just sort of, I understand the drama of this, but we are over the hills and far away in terms of historical accuracy of the battle. This is one of the worst battles I've ever seen. In terms of accuracy. I mean, I put it up there with 300, but at least 300 was more entertaining. This is particularly bad, and I think we're going to leave it there. The battle has been won by William, but we've all lost. I kind of feel like Harold Godwinson right now, in that I think this has been a fairly dreadful series. Obviously, I'm looking at it from the historical point of view more than the entertainment point of view, and who knows? Comment below and tell me, do you think from an entertainment point of view that it's worth a watch? Because they've just made mistake after mistake, unforced error after unforced error, and it's just so many strange decisions, so many strange ones, like the colors, just making everything so dark, and just not paying attention to some obvious details. It's interesting that they've missed obvious details regarding historical accuracy and very small ones. So an example of a small one is the helmet that I mentioned before, like William raising his helmet. And then the larger ones, like the Battle of Stamford Bridge, being fought without a bloody bridge, and a battle that was known to have taken place in the sun, in the heat, suddenly is covered in fog. It's been bad. It's not been good. I have not enjoyed this, and I think it's a great shame, because to get an actor of Nikolai Coster-Waldau's caliber, they clearly put a lot of effort into this, and the budget was clearly high. You don't get him for a cheap price, and so given that sort of expectation and the resource put into the series, you would have hoped for something much better. Something that maybe could be shown in sort of 20, 30 years time, perhaps a modern I, Claudius, which is a whole different subject. But yeah, I'm thoroughly disappointed. A very special thank you goes to my wonderful Patreon supporters. Their names are on the screen right now. If you'd like to join them, a link is in the description below. Now tell me what you thought. Do you think I focused too much on historical accuracy and should have given the BBC more leeway with dramatisation? I'd like to know all of your opinions on this matter. There's been much debate online about everything. Perhaps you think I missed something, think I overemphasised things or underemphasised others. I want to hear it all. So please leave that sacrifice to the god of the algorithm with a comment below. And otherwise, please like and subscribe, and I will see you on the next one.